This communism is social ownership.
Welcome to the Adam and Sheridan Show video podcast number 31. I'm Adam Portwright.
I'm Sheridan, and today we're talking labor. Obvious.
Because we're wearing these dreads, these duds.
These
Dreads?
duds.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of things that we mentioned on our radio show. Labor struggles in celebration of Mayday, the Haymarket Massacre of 1886, I think it was.
And I'll be talking about something yet to be determined because this is pre-recorded. Stay tuned.
What I want to go over right now is something that everyone should have already learned in middle or high school, and that's the struggle for the 8-hour working day, which culminated with the Haymarket Massacre on May the 4th, 1886. Now, what was the Haymarket Massacre? Because we hear that term being used. The Haymarket Massacre occurred in the city of Chicago. There were tens of thousands of workers who were out actually protesting the killing by the Chicago police of a striker the previous day. There was a company that was abusing its workers. Some of those workers went on strike, and the police shot at them. Something you can probably find in today's headlines, actually. So these thousands, tens of thousands of Chicagoans were out protesting that. And at some point, the police came, and they said, you need to disperse. You need to get out of here. You're causing a disturbance to the peace, which was totally untrue. It was a very peaceful rally. It was coincidentally at that point that someone threw a bomb and it exploded and killed some people, several police officers and several civilians. Now, the thing is, we don't know to this day who threw that bomb, and we certainly didn't know at the time. And this explosion gave somehow the police the right to begin opening fire on the crowd and killing any number of innocent civilians who had clearly nothing to do with it. And what happened was the press leapt at this. They said this is a great opportunity for the press, not just in Chicago but everywhere, to show how disgusting and terroristic and violent the workers' movement is. And that's exactly what happened. And that led to a frame-up of four very well-known anarchists. Their names are actually Albert Parsons, who was a very famous anarchist, August Spies, Adolf Fischer, and George Engel. All of them were tried and convicted. Some of them their sentences were commuted some years later by a judge by a governor, of Illinois, who said this is a sham trial. There is no way that there's any evidence to support them being convicted, and they were later exonerated. Unfortunately, some of them not so lucky. 2 people were hanged, and one other person committed suicide. So this led to the deaths of some people that were considered martyrs by the working class movement, and it certainly didn't do anything to stop the workers themselves. Now, what led to the Haymarket Massacre? There was a huge working class movement in the 1870s that happened after the Civil War, the American Civil War. And a lot of that was led by people like Karl Marx, who in the 1860s formed the First International, the Working Men's Association. And also the Paris Commune in 1871, where workers in Paris took over the city government. These ideas they took root, I should say, in the United States, specifically in the urban areas, and specifically among the immigrant communities. And these ideas were the impetus for the 8-hour working day, for mass unionization, for strikes. Socialist ideas, not labor reformist ideas or democratic ideas, but actual Marxist ideas were used. And what was tried to do, and which was successful for many decades after this, was the crushing of this movement by the business class, by the media, by the police. All of these factions came together and worked to either physically destroy the workers in the case of the Haymarket riot, or to damn them in the press, or to fire them if they worked for businesses and they went on strike. So you're seeing the beginning of the real class movement with the Haymarket Massacre, and coming out of that into the first part of the 1920s. The working class forms its unions, and also the capitalist class begins to form its interests. And that was really the beginning of the modern industrial proletariat in the United States. And when we celebrate Mayday today, ironically, it really goes back to the Haymarket Massacre, but we don't really see it celebrated in the United States anymore. It's more of an international holiday. I've heard people on Fox News say things like, oh, that commie holiday that the Russians celebrate, that Mayday holiday. Well, that holiday comes from working class Americans in Chicago in 1886. That's an American holiday that we did celebrate until the U.S. Congress passed the Labor Day holiday law, which kind of usurped that and turned it into a patriotic, go America kind of law. So that's kind of a summarization of the Haymarket Massacre, where the working class today comes from, where its roots are, and where we can go again if we want to. There's a very rich history of socialism and how it influenced the very first workers in the United States. So I hope all of you take this and go out and research those ideas on your own. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to talk a little bit about the mining strikes. In 1893, the U.S. went through a major depression, leaving labor in a very precarious position. There were an estimated 3 million unemployed by 1984. 3 million was a lot of people in 1894, and without the safety net, the result of this was starvation and desperation. The coal mine strikes were a major chapter in this era of labor struggle. The United Mine Workers decided to institute a suspension to start April 21st, 1894. Though the union only had 20,000 members, 125,000 struck, from Washington to Alabama to Nova Scotia, which didn't even have an organization. President McBride of the UMW stated that workers were the masters of the situation and could command anything within reason. Even the workers in Thompson Run, Pennsylvania, who had been granted higher wages, went on strike in sympathy with the bituminous mine workers. The miners marched into other areas to recruit others into the strike. They were attempting to bring every miner out on strike, and they met with some great successes, but very often. They were also met with armed resistance from owners and forces of the state. Striking miners from Monongahela and Youghiogheny Rivers region assembled and marched outside a mine to keep it closed. Strikebreakers were brought in under the guard of 50 armed deputies. As the strikebreakers were being led to work, strikers yelled for them to go home. They turned back, only to be escorted into the factory by the armed guards. The strikers moved forward, and a firefight broke out. The strikers ran, and the deputies chased after them, shooting into the crowd while chasing them. They killed 4, wounded many others, and the next day 150 strikers were in jail. Seeing the force of the state being used to protect the interest of capital against the interest of the worker, one striker said, quote, "We are American citizens and demand the protection that is afforded the company." Similar clashes with state and federal forces occurred again and again, but solidarity among workers was pretty strong. The Baltimore and Ohio Railroad ordered shipment and rail workers to replace the miners. The workers refused and were fired. The Elm Grove mines near Wheeling, West Virginia, contracted 4 different lots of strikebreakers, only to have all of them quit one by one. The strikers were targeting trains, which led to a shortage of coal. Trains and steamships switched to burning wood, streetcars and waterworks shut down, markets closed for lack of coal. But the miners' condition eventually got much worse. The New York Times reported on May 30th, "The miners say their wives and children are at the point of starvation. They are subsisting mainly on dandelions, but have no flour, meat, or other provisions." Dandelions. The union officials at this point accepted a lower rate than what had been offered at the beginning of the strike. But on June 13th in Camden, PA, the miners continued to strike and voted unanimously that the new rate was unacceptable. Miners in most other areas continued the strike as well. This passion, however, didn't lead to a win. After 2 months of battles and starvation, the strikes failed because a lot of people were on strike, but not everybody. Mines in PA, West Virginia, and Virginia doubled their production, and they were shipping to areas of the country affected by the shortage. The strikes weren't limited to the coal industry, though. Metal miners struck at Cripple Creek, Colorado, which led to a battle between Colorado militia put together by a state after a promise of money and arms, and the miners who had organized against a 10-hour day. This battle only ended, this was an entire city in battle, which only ended after the governor established the 8-hour day. These miners were willing to go to war with capital and the state for the sake of these strikes. The economic downturn was starving them, and they were going to take societal resources that were being used to enrich the few while the many starved. This was a very contentious time and a very big time in the labor struggle of the early United States.
That was a rousing tale.
It was intense. It was intense. And the reason we're covering labor history today is because, of course, Mayday, which happened 14 days ago.
Well, Mayday is a month-long celebration for us.
Is it?
Yeah, we like to celebrate all day long. You should be at the Gorite household. We have effigies of capitalists all throughout the house,
into which the cats pee.
Yes, makes it realistic.
But what I got, because I was researching a lot of this stuff for the first time, and what I got was just it was a war. It was a civil war. And this is something I'd never heard of in my life. You know, people going to war, battling the state, battling militias, battling federal forces because of the train stoppages for these strikes. I mean, that's huge. This is nuts.
Another thing was, the Civil War itself had just happened, 1865, and a lot of these struggles are occurring in the 1870s and 1880s. So the idea of emancipation was in the air, and that transferred from emancipation of slaves and black people to the emancipation of the industrial slaves.
But I think it also had something to do with German and Italian immigrants.
Oh, absolutely.
Because, it had a lot to do with that. So I'm not sure how much Marx was into the Civil War, but I'm not sure that it really had too much to do with that, because there was also a very huge racial contingent to it. Because when
of course,
the New York Times were reporting that certain mines had brought in Italians. They said something like, we brought in Italians to break the strike, and they would even hire them if regular workers didn't come back to work. And I'm like, what?
Well, that's something the ruling class has done historically. They've used issues of race to divide the working class, and people were starving in the streets. So not everyone was able to resist that temptation.
They were eating dandelions.
Of getting a job. Yeah.
They weren't farmers. They weren't living in fertile grounds. They were living on mountains. And what do we have an abundance of? We have dandelions.
And I had the allergies to prove it. I don't know. But let me tell you something. I need to say, though, that the ideas of Karl Marx, he was a contemporary of these times. He died in 1883, I believe. And his ideas, without question, influenced American workers, without question. Just as they influenced workers in Russia in the 19-teens, when the Russian Revolution happened. It didn't happen here, but it still could.
And these strikes largely happened either without unions, or at one point the union said, we'll accept whatever, because they were starving, and the strikers said, no, we're going to hold out. It didn't work. 2 months the strike lasted, and people were too poor to stay out of work. But you know, it's very interesting to see that, like what strikes were, what unions were, what workers were at that point, and how they reacted with state power and the owners, and what's going on right now. And labor is a completely different beast. So if you think about strikes, if you think about protests, if you think about labor at the moment, and the way it operates and the way it exists, and the way we view ourselves as, you know, we allow ourselves and our worth to be determined by owners. You know, we say, well, I shouldn't be asking for more money because I'm not in a skilled profession, or I didn't go to college, or, you know, I'm not, you know, I don't have the right to determine that. But that's not true. Some human is behind those decisions. And, you know, a lot of them are super duper wealthy. So
one of the things that we're going to be discussing in our next podcast is the Flint sit-down strikes in the 1930s. We're going to yes.
I did not know that.
I've unilaterally made that decision.
On camera, too. How dare you?
And we're going to talk about the labor movement during that era, which was more militant. It went from striking in the street to actually striking inside the factories themselves.
Wow.
So we'll talk about that history and how those ideas were influenced by socialist ideas.
Check out the Pullman strike. Check out many of the strikes that happened throughout history. I mentioned the Bituminous Miner Strikes, metal miner strikes. You talked about Haymarket, which is the origin of Mayday. Which has since become Loyalty Day and Law Day in the U.S. It's hilarious, and it was confirmed by Obama.
And not only that, but it's become Hang That Commie Day, even though Russia and the Bolsheviks took that from the United States. But anyways.
In any case, we're going to leave you with a short lesson. So.
Don't forget to email us, AdamandSheridanShow@gmail.com, or leave a message in the space below. Like us, subscribe.
Facebook us. Facebook is a thing which you can do. It's a verb.
131 likes now on Facebook.
Absolutely. So. We're excited, and we're hoping to get more by the end of the summer. Check us out on Twitter. Twitter is also a thing that we do rarely.
We do Twitter.
We do Twitter.
On occasion.
Like, subscribe, do all that stuff, and check us out on radio.
Listen to our radio show 6 p.m. Fridays, and also 11 a.m. on Sundays. We interviewed recently David Walsh of the World Socialist website. He's the arts editor, so check out
SoundCloud.
That when it goes up on our SoundCloud.
Absolutely.
If you haven't already listened to it on the radio. Yep. All right, I'm Adam Courtwright.
I'm Sheridan. Stay active.